I invite you to join me, to participate in this inquiry into the miracle of our souls, to become part of the psychic connection.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. My name's Nyiam. This presentation is called The Five Sense Fallacy, Intuition, and Non-Local Perception. My YouTube is youtube.com/NyiamTV, NYIAMTV, and my website is www.thefeedbackloop.info. The main purpose of this presentation is to share a little bit of research on the topic of human perception, share some of my own experiences and results in relation to this subject. I want to help familiarize people a little bit with the idea of remote viewing in a little more detail than usual. Spark some questions about information and the nature of reality, implications for human creativity and problem solving, and the whole idea of intelligence. Does the IQ test really measure intelligence? Do we really know what intelligence even is? And I hope to remove some of the hocus pocus surrounding this idea of remote viewing, this whole concept. There's a lot of new age type ideas floating around, and at times it can distort exactly what we're trying to focus on here when it comes to remote viewing. So I just want to go through two quotes here before we get into it. So, for centuries we have used an oversimplified and inaccurate model to explain the human senses. Even now, high school biology classes still teach the five senses, but recent scientific research has discovered that there are many more than five senses, and these discoveries have radically changed our understanding of what the senses are and how they work. Deciphering the Senses, Expanding World of Human Perception. A great book that I'm going to touch on in some further slides. Here's a quote by Ingo Swann. The concept that we are completely limited to what we perceive by the physical five senses dates from only about 1845 and was from the outset solely a scientific hypothesis which has never been demonstrated by conclusive scientific fact. A little bit of a different take from what we've been taught. So, what have we been taught? Well, what we were taught looks a little something like this. It's a simplified five senses model. Kind of like a computer with five inputs. We have these sense organs, the sense of smell, sound, sight, taste, and touch. And these receive inputs from the outside world. Something happens in our brain, and we perceive reality. We're taught that we're limited to physical objects and things and certain frequency ranges. Visible light, for example, the audible frequency range. We're also taught that our subjective activities, the things that go on inside of our minds, are separate from the outside world. We were always shown nice little drawings and images. Every one of us has probably done something like this when we were younger. And we never really go back to question these ideas. We're taught them when we're young, and we're unable to even critically think or question what we're being taught. So I hope to take you down memory lane, and maybe we can look at these ideas a little bit closer. So how many senses do we have? Here's a quick Google search here. You can see in the results popping up 6, 33, 9, 21, and here it says 5 senses. Most children are taught that the human body has 5 senses: sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. But many neurologists identify 9 or more senses, and some list as many as 21. So this may be a bit of a shock to some people. To most of us, it's an open and shut case. We have 5 senses, done deal. But even the scientific community is having a bit of a trouble figuring out exactly what's going on here. Here's a BBC article. How many senses do we have? How many senses does a human being have? Humans have a lot more than 5 senses today, I found out. So what exactly is going on? Well, let's see what is a sense. So let's look at the always trusty Wikipedia. It's always a great way to find out public opinion on something. Here it says, a sense is a physiological capacity of organisms that provide data for perception. The senses and their operation, classification, and theory are overlapping topics studied by a variety of fields, most notably neuroscience, cognitive psychology, and philosophy of perception. The nervous system has a specific nervous system and a sense organ or sensor dedicated to each sense. And that's pretty obvious. We all know that. Hands are for touch, your tongue is for taste, ears are for hearing, so on and so forth. But here it continues. Humans have multitude of sensors. Sight, hearing, taste, smell, touch are the 5 traditionally recognized senses. The ability to detect other stimuli beyond those governed by these most broadly recognized senses also exists. And these sensory modalities include temperature, kinesthetic sense, pain, balance, vibration, and various internal stimuli. So it's even broadly recognized that we have other senses besides the 5 basic senses that we think of, like our sense of temperature, our kinesthetic sense, the sense of where your body is in space, sense of pain, sense of balance and vibration. And here it notes, other animals have receptors to sense the world around them within degrees of capability, varying greatly between human species. So it talks about mammals that have, for instance, senses of electrical or magnetic fields, or that can detect water pressure. So let's move along. So what is perception? We know now that senses provide data for perception. So what is perception? It comes from a Latin word, perspire. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but it means to take in or to receive. And some basic definitions here are a result of perceiving, observation, a mental image, a mental concept, awareness of elements of environment through physical sensation. This one's interesting. Direct intuitive cognition, insight, and a capacity for comprehension. If you take a look at these definitions given, you'll find that all but one are pretty obvious as to what's going on. The result of perceiving, awareness of elements through physical sensation. All these things are pretty straightforward. You're becoming aware of what's around you through physical sensation. But this whole direct intuitive cognition part seems to be a little bit out of place. And we're going to get to that because for anyone who's interested in the subject, we know that intuition is kind of the key to this whole, sixth sense, ESP type idea. So let's move forward. This is taken from the CIA's website on their articles on perception. So they say perception. Why can't we see what is there to be seen? And it says, people tend to think of perception as a passive process. We see, hear, smell, taste, or feel stimuli that impinge upon our senses. We think that if we are at all objective, we record what is actually there. Yet perception is demonstrably an active rather than a passive process. It constructs rather than records reality. Perception implies understanding as well as awareness. It is a process of inference in which people construct their own version of reality on the basis of information provided through the 5 senses. And you got a little cartoon here of, 2 people looking at something from different perspectives. One guy says it's a 9, one guy says it's a 6, and in this case, they're both correct. So here's a couple little cartoons, little drawings that were taken from the same article. If you read through these phrases here in these triangles, just quickly read this one, and then this one. You might notice, after you read them, go back and really take a close look at it again. You might notice that there's 2 thes and 2 a's and another 2 thes in these phrases. And if you read through them the first time, most people don't see the extra the or the extra a. The mind tends to edit those out because we're used to seeing things a certain way. We read all the time, we see words all the time, and 2 thes beside each other or 2 a's is not a common sight. So there's a part of our perception, this whole idea of us actively creating our perception. It's not simply what's out there comes in. It's we're actively building our reality with our perceptions. So here's figure 2, and this is showing how impressions resist change. So if you start looking at these images, this image over here on the left, the top left, and move across to the right, and then move down here and across, most people find that the drawing changes from a man's face, and it just gets distorted as you move along to the right. Whereas when people start looking at this image from the bottom right here, they see a woman. They start off seeing a woman, and as you move left and up and across over here, it's very hard for the perception of the woman to change into the man's face, or the perception of the man's face to change into the woman. Impressions tend to resist change. Once we make up our mind on what something is, it's hard. It gets hard to see it another way, and this cartoon kind of helps illustrate that. And this is a kind of famous one. Some people may have seen this before. And it says, it is difficult to look at the same information from different perspectives. This image here is of, there's two women in this picture. There's a young woman and an older woman. Most people who look at this image, for me, for example, I usually see the young woman first. And here's the side of her face here, the cheek, and the neck down here, and she's got something on her head. And once your perception kind of locks in on this young woman image, it becomes a challenge for most people to be able to see the image of the old woman that is here. And I'll give you a few seconds to struggle with that if you can see it or not. But yeah, like I said, once you've locked into one perception, so let's say you see this young woman, her face is turned to the side, here's her cheek, her nose, and she's looking off into the distance over here. But if you can relax your observation for a moment and loosen up your perception, you can maybe see that this cheek of the young woman can also be seen as a nose, and this chin down here, this neck of the young woman, it can actually be a chin, and the necklace is a mouth. And if you start to see it that way, you can see that this image looking down in this area, these become eyes looking over in this direction. This is an old lady looking down into the left, and the young lady is looking off in the other direction. So you can kind of flip-flop in your mind between these two images, and it's hard to see both at the same time. So that's just a little demonstration of the whole idea of, seeing things in a certain way, and your perception can stick. It's hard to see things from different perspectives at the same time. So let's move along. So what is to sense something? Okay, what is sense? It means to be or become conscious of, to grasp or comprehend, or to grok, or to detect automatically. And to get senses, we need sense organs. So what is an organ? A sense organ. Organ, a differentiated structure consisting of cells and tissues and performing some specific function or cooperating in an activity. For example, the eyes and related structures that make up the visual organs or ears, and related structures that make up the hearing organs. So here we have an eyeball and all its parts. Here we have the hearing organs, the ear, and all of its complex parts that make it up. And these supply data for perception. There's a popular scene in the Matrix movie, and I like to use this because it's a good metaphor for what we're talking about. There's this early scene in the Matrix where Keanu Reeves, who's playing Neo, he's brought to the real world. He's awoken to the real reality, and he finds out that the world that he's been living is a digital simulation. It's a fake world. It's all digital. So he's getting ready to get plugged back into this digital world, and they have a digital simulation where they can load you up in a kind of like a white room where you can load in anything you want. You can create any environment you want. And so Neo gets plugged into this thing for the first time, and he's touching the chair, and he's saying, this isn't real. And then we have the famous scene of Morpheus. He says, what is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. And this is kind of what I'm touching on here with this idea of the sense and the sense organs supplying data for perception. For you to have a perception of anything, for you to call something real, your sense organs are going to provide some sort of data to your awareness, and you're going to have a cognition. So what do all these words mean? Impulse, information impulse to the brain. We got to kind of dig into these a little bit to understand them a little bit better. So information, an interesting definition for information that applies to what we're looking at here is a signal impressed upon the input of a communication system. So what's a signal? A signal is something that incites to action, a detectable physical or non-physical quantity or impulse, such as a voltage, current, or magnetic field strength, by which messages or information can be transmitted, right? And an impulse is a wave of excitation transmitted through the tissue, and especially nerve fibers and muscles, that results in physiological and mind-brain activity or inhibition of it. So we can see that information, signals, and impulses are very tangled in with each other. These things all go together. Information has a signal, and a signal carries an impulse. And these things are closely related to our ideas of perception, as we'll see. So we know that signals get sent to the brain from the sense organs, and something happens. Either results in some type of physiological or mind-brain activity, right? So what is this brain thing, and what does that do? So we know we have two brain hemispheres, right? We got two brain hemispheres, and we know that the brain processes, in general, the brain processes information in this kind of like two-part system. We got the left brain and the right brain. Now this is general. This is a general idea here. There is overlap in the functions, but I'm trying to keep this. Sorry about that. Yeah, there is some overlap in the functions here, but generally speaking, the left brain deals with critical thinking, analytic thought, logic, linear thought, language, science, math, and verbal communications. It's handling verbal and analytic thought, constantly analyzing over time. And then we have the less investigated and more mysterious right brain, and it's dealing with non-critical thought, pattern recognition. We got intuition there again, that word popping up. It's more holistic. It has our pattern memory. It deals with vision, sound, 3D form and shape, and nonverbal communication. And this is where a lot of our creative thought, and here's that word again, intuition, and recognition of patterns. So we have these two different tools that we process information with in our brain. And we've been heavily indoctrinated to use the left side of our brain more than our right. The right is less discovered, less investigated in the West, and we're still trying to get a hang on exactly what goes on with the right brain. So let's look at this intuition thing that keeps popping up here. So what is the definition for intuition? Because this is a word that gets thrown around. We always hear maybe a device being intuitive or a person being intuitive, a mother's intuition. What is it? What does it mean? Intuition, the power or faculty of attaining to direct knowledge or cognition without rational thought or inference. That's from Webster's. The Encyclopedia of Occultism and Parapsychology defines intuition as that sense of faculty in the human mind by which man knows or may know facts of which he would otherwise not be cognizant, acts which might not be apparent to him through the process of reason or so-called scientific proof. So we're dealing with a faculty, a sense or faculty in the human that allows them to get information that is not conventional. It doesn't use a scientific method. It doesn't use rational thought or thought or reference. It's not rational. It's a direct knowledge or cognition. So it's very mysterious. There aren't many, authoritative definitions for intuition. It's a very mysterious topic because, as we'll see, this is a touchy subject for different reasons. So I just wanted to give you some background information on this whole idea of the other senses, right? So as we were talking about in an earlier slide, there's different takes on how many senses we have. Some say 5, 6, 33, there's all these different numbers floating around. So here's a little bit from Deciphering the Senses, the Expanding World of Human Perception. This is from the inside leaf of the book. It says, and I said this at the beginning, I'm going to repeat it again here. For centuries, we have used an oversimplified and inaccurate model to explain the human senses. Even now, high school biology classes still teach the 5 senses, but recent scientific research has discovered that there are many more than 5 senses, and these discoveries have radically changed our understanding of what the senses are and how they work. Rivlin and Gravel redefine for the general reader the spectrum of human perceptions from the normal to the newly discovered to the extrasensory. And now I'm going to read this bottom take here is from Ingo Swann's Secret of Power, and he's talking about this little blurb from the book. He's saying, "Now, lest there be some misunderstanding here, the two authors are not describing psychological or mental functions. They are discussing the actual existence within our biology of minute physical, chemical, bioelectromagnetic receptors and sensors that interact with the networks of information processing resources of the organism." So they're not talking about some kind of mental thing that goes on in our heads. When they talk about expanding human perception and the 5 senses, they're actually speaking of actual sense organs, new sense organs that have been discovered within the body, actual physical, chemical, bioelectromagnetic receptors and sensors that we didn't know about before. And he says here, Ingo says here, "It's quite easy to ascertain that 5 senses are obviously not enough to account for the huge range of sensory possibilities of which the human species is capable. No one can survive very well on just 5 senses. Ask any seafarer, mountain climber, football or basketball player, explorer or inventor, martial artist expert, or even someone seeking sex. The moment automatic reflexes or intuitive stuff enters into their talk, you know that you have departed from the realm of physical 5 and entered into the realms of additional senses." All right? So what are some of these sensors and receptors that we're speaking about? Well, we're talking about, and this may seem like science fiction to some people, but this is the real deal. These are real discoveries that happened once these are real sensors and receptors that were found after we developed the electron microscope. We were never able to see inside of cells and see the small, minute, tiny things that were inside our body. And so these are some of the receptors and sensors that have been found in the human body. So, keep your seatbelt on for this one. But some of them at the same time you may become familiar and realize that there were experiences in your life where you actually interacted with these senses and used them yourself. So receptors, I'm going to highlight a few. Receptors in the nose sensing systems that smell emotions and that can identify motives, sexual receptivity, antagonism, benevolence, and all these are formats of what is commonly referred to as like vibe sensing. You pick up someone's vibe, someone enters the room, and all of a sudden you feel a certain way. Directional finding and locating receptors in the endocrine and neuropeptide systems. And if you're familiar with dowsing, this could play a part in dowsing, helping senses that help you find direction. Whole body receptors, including hair, that identify fluidic motions of horizontal, vertical, diagonal, and even not visually perceived things. So like in the martial art Aikido, there's a whole psychic portion where the practitioner is able to respond to things movements and things that he doesn't even see. There's a famous clip of the guy using a sword to cut a bullet. Obviously, he wasn't seeing that with his eyes. Receptors that trigger alarm and apprehension before their sources are directly perceived. So a type of psychic foresight, intuition. So people have hunches, bad feelings about things. These are more than just random thoughts in your head. These are the information from those feelings is coming from a sense organ. So if the pineal gland is fully functional, it acts as a non-visual photoreceptor. A lot of talk about pineal gland this and decalcify pineal gland that. In the last few years, a lot of attention on the pineal gland. Not a lot of uses, not a lot of people actually showing an actual use of this, amazing pineal gland. Well, it turns out it can be a non-visual photoreceptor if you can get a hold of it, and we're going to look at that a bit later. Sense of magnetic fields, whole body receptors to detect pheromones, sexual receptivity, fear, love, admiration, danger, pain in others, intentions in others, formerly so-called vibe sensing or psychic reading, you know what I mean? So these are some of the sensors and receptors that have been found in the human body that can help account for these, additional senses that we have. So let's move along. Two brains, we talked about the two hemispheres of the brain. Well, it turns out that we seem to have this kind of two-part mind, and maybe even more than two parts, but in a general idea, we have conscious awareness, and then we have this whole idea of a subconscious or unconscious mind. And in between them, there's a threshold. And I made this little diagram of an iceberg in the water. And the tip of the iceberg, that's like conscious awareness, what's above the surface. A little bit above the surface. That's what we take as, all the information that we're getting. We think our conscious awareness is fully informed and is making all the right choice. Is making the choices is kind of like the awareness in charge, so to speak. But it turns out that there's an approximated 11 million bits of information transferred from the sensing systems to the brain each second. So, but according to textbooks on human physiology, the conscious part, above the threshold of awareness, seems to only be able to get a grasp on somewhere between 16 and 50 bits per second. So out of 11 million bits of information that our senses are sending to our conscious awareness, only about 16 to 50 bits per second is actually being brought into conscious awareness. So there's kind of like this barrier between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. And a lot of the actions going on in the subconscious area, where we, as in our waking state, are completely out of the loop. We don't really have any say or feel in that, most of the time. So this is an interesting key to this intuition and non-local perception. We're going to find out this whole idea of the subconscious mind and what else could be inside of it, the other parts or the other faculties in there, is an important part to this research. Not a lot of people, scientifically speaking, nowadays talk much about the subconscious mind, but in the past, authors were open and they would talk about this idea of the subconscious mind all the time. Here's a little blurb from Robert Collier. He says, "The subconscious mind is a distinct entity. It occupies the whole human body, and when not opposed in any way, it has absolute control over all the functions, conditions, and sensations of the body. While the objective conscious mind has control over all of our voluntary functions and motions, the subconscious mind controls all of the silent, involuntary, and vegetative functions, nutrition, waste, all secretions and excretions, the action of the heart and the circulation of the blood, the lungs and respiration and breathing, and all cell life, cell changes, and development are positively under the complete control of the subconscious mind. This was the only mind animal had before the evolution of the brain, and it could not, nor can it yet reason inductively, but its power of deductive reasoning is perfect. And more, it can see without the use of physical eyes. It perceives by intuition. It has the power to communicate with others without the aid of ordinary physical means. It can read the thoughts of others, it receives intelligence, and transmits it to people at a distance. Distance offers no resistance against the successful missions of the subconscious mind. Now that might be a little bit far out for some people and sound a little bit woo-hoo, but you're going to find that although he may not be, I'm not claiming that he's 100% correct or whatnot, but he's onto something, that's for sure. There's an interesting condition called agnosia, and this ties in very closely with the whole idea of remote viewing and subconscious processing, the whole idea of the subconscious mind getting all this information, and we're only getting the tip of the iceberg. This whole condition of agnosia, which is experienced by people who have different brain lesions in the brain that may have damaged certain parts of the brains. It's an interesting phenomenon. Sorry, let me just get through my notes here. So, how do we know what's going on under the hood? How do we know there's some kind of subconscious processing going on? Besides the fact that our bodies grow, our cells work, the excretions, the nutrition, all these things are working in our bodies. Let's ignore that for a moment, and let's look at it from a more of a informational perspective. So people with agnosia who have brain damage of different types, there's two different types of agnosia that I'm going to focus on here. There's apperceptive visual agnosia, and people who have this condition, they have impaired object recognition. So a person who has this condition can't form a percept out of visual information. So in this example over here, there's a drawing of an apple, and a person with apperceptive visual agnosia is asked to copy the image of the apple, and you can see they're unable to look at the picture of the apple and recognize it as an apple, or and reproduce it. But when asked from memory, they can draw something that is akin to an apple. Here's another example with the book. So they can't. Their eyeballs, definitely light is coming into their eyeballs, and they're seeing the image. But the whole under the hood subconscious processing part, something's wrong. It's not clicking. It doesn't convert. The information doesn't resonate. Then there's another version of this. This is called associative visual agnosia. And these people have impaired object identification, right? So individuals with associative agnosia, they can't give meaning to a formed percept. So here's a drawing of a key. They're able to repeat the drawing. The person up here couldn't repeat the drawing by looking at it. This person can see the image. They can draw it pretty much exactly the same. But then the faculty inside of them that says, that's a key, or that's a pig, that's a train, that's a bird, that part of them it doesn't kick in. It has no meaning. They're able to draw these pictures, but the picture has no meaning. Someone will have to help them along, and they know what a key is. The person would know what a key is, but they're unable to look at the image of the key and make that connection in their mind that this image is a key. And then we have the whole phenomenon of blindsight or unconscious vision. And this is the ability of people who are cortically blind due to lesions in their primary visual cortex. They're able to respond to visual stimuli that they don't see. And there's some interesting experiments on that you can look up online. Just look up blindsight, unconscious vision. So we're going to move on here to the next slide. So if you meditate on the idea of seeing and observing, you'll understand that these are two different things. There's an old adage that one can look at something and not see it, But it also turns out that one could see something but not observe it. And that's a quote from Ingo Swann there. And it's true. How many times have you thought you saw something, thought you observed something, saw it, and then were asked a question about it, but, you didn't really see it. You didn't really take in all there was to be taken in. This is the whole idea of tangible and intangible sensing. So we have physical perception. Obviously, our physical eyeballs can see physical objects and we can touch them and so on and so forth. But there's another type of perception that goes on along with the physical, and this is the idea of intangible sensing. Now, intangible information is derived from making deductions about what exists and detecting implications, and that's with or without tangible evidence for them, right? So what do I mean by intangible? So intangible are things you can't touch, things that aren't physical. So like, let's say, for example, the idea of love or economics or the ability for something to be stacked on top of each other like stones, or for the wood to connect at joints and angles. These are things that are deduced in the mind. They're not evident from the physical objects themselves. Looking at a pile of rocks, there's nothing inherent in the physical rocks themselves that would make one realize that, oh, you can build a structure out of these, a beautiful symmetrical structure. Or there's nothing inherently about metal rods that would allow one to realize that they can create a structure out of them. These are things that are detected about physical things, and we have cognitions about them. We become aware. Mental activity happens when we observe objects. Half of it is physical or tangible, and there's another part of it that's intangible, like a piece of art being beautiful. That's something that happens. It's an intangible sense. Do you get what I mean? Hopefully you're following me here with this. So tangible versus intangible sensing. This is the kind of like the other side of sensing that we all do all the time. We all talk about intangible things, and we make intangible observations all the time. But it's not really conscious. We're not really thinking of it in that way. So, dumb phones versus smartphones. I grew up, when I was a kid, this is what a cell phone looked like. It had pretty much one function. It did that one function reasonably well. But in the more recent years, we've had, the explosion of the internet. Microprocessors have gotten smaller and smaller. Wireless communications have gotten better and better. Now we have smartphones. And if you consider the differences between a smartphone and a what I'm calling here a dumb phone, or a regular phone, phones from a classical phone, the main difference between a smartphone and a dumb phone is that the smartphone has more sensors, it has more connectivity, it has an intangible information processing system, so it has an operating system. Now anyone can make an app and install the app on there, and it doesn't require any changes to the hardware. Whereas the old phone, the dumb phones, they did one thing: they just made calls. They had one antenna. They transmitted the signal, turned it into audio. It took in your voice and transmitted that into a wireless signal to the cell phone tower. Whereas smartphones, well, they do all kinds of things. They got cameras on the front and the back. They got gyroscopes inside. They have voice recognition. They have Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, 3G, 4G, 5G. And then they have the ever-expanding software part to it. Whereas the dumb phones didn't have, any real operating system to think of. Nothing expandable. Nothing that could adapt. The smartphones make decisions on their own. You can hit a button on your phone and it's going to go pull the weather and pull information about traffic and put you on the best route. That's what kind of makes it a smartphone. It's able to do behind-the-scene processing and it pulls from many different sensors. It pulls from all these different sensors and receptors, processes it, and then gives you the answer. That's the whole idea that the phone is smart. You don't have to do the work. So what happens when you have dumbed down humans? This is a whole idea that is popular. A lot of people would agree that general population is being dumbed down in a sense, but what does that mean? Well, horses are usually made to wear these little blockers on their face over their eyes, and this keeps them looking forward so they can't look off to the side or look behind them, and they won't get thrown off track. It reduces their scope of information, their visual information, and keeps them keeps them on track. Human beings, we're being treated the same way. We're very narrow-minded. We've locked into the physical reality with the whole idea of the physical five senses only, and we're usually too busy watching Netflix, or we're not tapping into our full information accessing capabilities. Just like the horse, we've been our field of vision, our focus, our ideas of perception have been narrowed, and this reduces our ability to take our own volition, to act on our own will, and use our own creativity. Just like the horse, who just has to walk down the street and carry the load. He's unable to really shake free. He's being limited to. He has too little information to act on. And it's a similar thing happening with human beings. We're being reduced. Our senses have been reduced, or the idea of what our senses are has been reduced, and therefore we operate at a reduced capacity. Now, this whole subject is a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people who have a certain way of seeing the world. There's two main ways to see the world. Stephen A. Schwartz points this out in his book, Secret Vaults of Time. He talks about the physicalist, materialist model, and the interdependent, interconnected model. The physicalist, materialist model is the model that most of mainstream science ascribes to today. Most of the world takes this as to be scientific conclusive fact. And the main premises of this belief are the mind is solely the result of physiologic processes. So biological, physiological processes have created your experience in your mind. Each consciousness is a discrete entity. That's to say, everything is separate from each other and discrete. No communication is possible except through the defined physiologic senses, and that's the whole idea that only the physical five senses can communicate information. And consciousness dwells entirely within the time-space continuum. So there's this whole idea of time and space, and in the physicalist, materialist model, our minds are within that continuum of time and space, trapped, so to speak. Then there's another way of seeing the world, and this is the interdependent, interconnected model. And this states that only certain aspects of the mind are a result of physiologic processes, that consciousness is causal, and that physical reality is its manifestation. So it's kind of the other way around. The physicalist model says that physicality and your physiology produces consciousness, whereas the interconnected model states that consciousness is causal. So it's a different way of seeing things. All consciousnesses, regardless of their physical manifestations, are part of a network of life which they both inform and influence, and are informed and influenced by. So there's a passage back and forth between the individual and the collective. And that some aspects of consciousness are not limited by the space-time continuum. And this interdependent, interconnected model is the model that I'm leaning towards after all the things that I've seen, experienced, and come to know over the last 7 or 8 years, looking at this subject. Let's look at a quote here from Dean Raden. He's a PhD. He's a senior scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and he's the founder of the Consciousness Research Laboratory at the University of University of Nevada in Las Vegas. He says, "Since primeval times, people have spoken of strange and sometimes profoundly meaningful personal experiences. Such experiences have been reported by the majority of the world's population and across all cultures. In modern times, they're still reported by most people, including the majority of college professors. These experiences, called psychic or psi, suggest the presence of deep, invisible interconnections among people and between objects and people. The most curious aspect of psi experience is that they seem to transcend the usual boundaries of time and space. The long-held common sense assumption is that the worlds of the subjective and objective are distinct with absolutely no overlap. Subjective is in here, in the head, and objective is out there in the world. Psi phenomenon suggests that the strict subjective-objective dichotomy may instead be part of a continuous spectrum, and that the usual assumptions about space and time are probably too restrictive." So this is what Dean Raden had to say after all of his research. He's saying this whole idea of subjective-objective being completely separate, we may have to, look at this again, because since the beginning of time, people have been talking about these experiences. So this isn't simply just some fantasy or a mental illness that people are suffering from. This is a real phenomenon that happens, and as he said, even including a majority of college professors have these kind of experiences. So what exactly is going on? So we have there's different names for psi. There's different names for these phenomena. As human beings, we like to put a name on everything. We like to categorize things and put them into little categories. So these are the common names for the different types of psi that have been observed and experienced. So one of the most familiar ones is telepathy. And this is the whole idea of information exchange between two or more minds without the use of ordinary senses. And mind you, here I'm using the accepted scientific terms here. Like, this is what mainstream science categorizes these things as. I'm not saying that I personally believe that these things are like this. I'm just explaining the concepts behind these kinds of interactions. So telepathy is seen as information exchange between two or more minds without the use of ordinary senses. We have the idea of clairvoyance. This is a French word that means clear seeing, and this one's very tied closely in with remote viewing. And this is information received from a distance beyond the reach of the ordinary senses. So a person being able to get information about an object or a place, something at a distance, there's no other mind involved, so to speak. So telepathy is like reading another person's mind, so to speak. Whereas clairvoyance would be like reading objects, getting information about anything without the help of any other person. It's the French word for clear seeing. And then we have the idea of PK, or psychokinesis. This is like spoon bending, moving objects, stuff you see in the movies that most people take as fantasy. This is mental interaction with animate or inanimate matter. Mind-matter interaction, PK, or telekinesis. You got the whole scene in The Matrix where the kid bends the spoon and he says, Neo's having this experience where he sees this spoon bend. And that's a example of PK, or psychokinesis. So these are the three main different names for psi. And then we have precognition. So precognition is seeing something in the future before it happens. Information perceived about future events, where information couldn't be inferred by ordinary means. Some variations on this include premonition, which is a foreboding of an unfavorable future event, and presentiment, a sensing of a future emotion. And a lot of people have experienced this in their life. I've had a couple precognitive experiences in my life, and many people have them in the forms of dreams. Some people have it in the form of like a premonition or a foreboding, a feeling that something bad is going to happen soon, or something's going to happen in the future. So I try to make a little diagram here. So we have our whole idea of the forward flow of time moving this way into the future. We have our person here in the present. And here's a future event, a stage collapsing at a rock concert. The whole idea of precognition is somehow this information, which we think of as being in the future, somehow moves back in time to the present, to the person in the now, who can give information about this event before it happens. If you check out The Conscious Universe by Dean Raden or Supernormal by Dean Raden, he explains the experiments that he did, which measure presentment and precognition using images displayed on a screen. Basically, a person's hooked up to electrodes, and their skin conductance is monitored. And what Dean Raden found out was that when emotionally exciting pictures were going to appear on the screen, people's bodies reacted before the picture was displayed on the screen. So let's say there's a picture of a snake that was going to appear in 2 seconds. The person's body would be reacting before the actual image of the snake appeared. Whereas when there's a calm picture, like some flowers or a rabbit that comes up on the screen, there's no presentment happening. The body is not having this stimulated response to the future event. So we were able to pick up, our bodies are able to pick up on these future emotions, future events, and things that are happening. And our conscious minds aren't always aware of this. You know what I mean? It's a very, very subtle thing. And of course, skin conductance equipment can pick up this kind of stuff. So how do we test this in the lab, right? People want to know, how can we repeat this over and over? Is this scientific? Is this a bunch of hogwash? What is it? Well, there's two main types of experiments that have had success in showing psi in the lab. One is called a forced choice experiment, and this is one most people are probably familiar with, which is where a participant is forced to choose from a set of answers or outcomes. You've all probably seen the star, square, circle, plus, wave cards. And maybe if you've ever played with your friends, or messing around with your friends, you try and guess the card that the other person has or something like that. This is a forced choice experiment. So you know the possible outcomes, and you have to choose from one, sort of like a multiple choice test. And this had some good results. People were able to perceive the card that was being concealed, but they experienced something called the decline effect. And this was that in the beginning of the experiments, they were scoring above chance. People would be nailing them, getting above chance results on selecting the correct Zener cards. But then over time, as the subjects got bored of this same task, there's only 5 choices. You're going to eventually, repeating these star, square, circle, plus in your mind over and over again, eventually it gets boring and repetitive, and the scores declined after a while. So it was scoring above chance in the beginning, and then it took a decline after a while. And this became troublesome because the probabilities, the results weren't staying the same. They were decreasing over time. And this is where the more successful experiment comes in. This is called a free choice, free response experiment. And this is where the participant is free to respond with anything that comes to their mind. So there's no pre-selected outcomes. These are like the telepathy experiments. Like if someone draws an image, a hidden image, and now you're going to try and draw what that hidden image is. This is a free response test. This is a free response experiment where you could draw anything. You could say anything, you can draw anything. Yeah, there's no limit to what you're going to express, whatever perceptions that come to you. And this is how remote viewing experiments work. These are free response experiments. And although these experiments have had success, they introduce imagination or noise. See, is where with the forced choice experiments, there is only a set choices to choose from. Therefore, it doesn't leave space for you to imagine things and bring in new ideas from your imagination that have nothing to do with the target. Whereas in remote viewing and other free response experiments, the thing you're supposed to be perceiving could be anything. So there's a higher chance of what we call noise, which is incorrect information, or your imagination getting involved, right? Because there's less limits. You're opening the boundaries of what the target could be. Therefore, you're introducing a higher chance for imagination. So hopefully, you can understand the difference between those: forced choice and free response. We're going to be focusing on free response with the remote viewing. These are the experiments that we're going to be interested in here. So, who did this? Who did the lab work? Did anyone do lab work? Yes. There was some very important lab work that went on in regards to this phenomenon of intuition. And it was something that's pretty popular. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time going through this. There's hundreds of videos on YouTube and documentaries and books about this. It's called Project Stargate. This was in the 1970s. Stanford Research Institute was contracted by the CIA and worked to create. They studied psychic functioning and intuition in the lab with famous psychic Ingo Swann, alongside Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ. And under contract from the CIA, they developed a 6-stage process that allows a person to take control of their intuition. And they coined the phrase remote viewing. So remote viewing is some definitions of remote viewing. Remote viewing is an advanced perceptual communication skill that was developed as an intelligence collection tool utilized by the CIA, DIA, and the United States military. And this is not a joke. This is real. This was really developed and was used in real applications. And I invite you to search online. There's one of the main books on this that shows the results is Mind Reach by Targ and Puthoff. Here's a couple other definitions for remote viewing here. Remote viewing is a human perceptual ability to access, by mental means alone, information blocked from normal perception by distance, shielding, or time. Here's a definition from Lynn Buchanan's website. Remote viewing is a very highly controlled set of physical and mental protocols which allow a person to bring something which lies hidden within the subconscious mind to the surface and objectify it. The protocols not only take care of the process of finding the hidden thoughts and emotions and bringing them to the surface, but also the process of keeping them clean. And this has to do with the imagination that I was just speaking of. So you want to keep them clean of pollution from the imagination and from emotions, desires, fears, and any other contaminants which lie closer to the surface of a person's conscious awareness and which would tend to color them. So a lot of people, when they think of intuition or psychic functioning in general, they assume this is going to be some kind of easy task where, some fully formed, perfect, clear as day image comes to you and you're able to just nail it every time. But it's not quite like that. There's all types of things in our own perceptual systems that color and taint information. Just like how we were showing earlier with the old lady and the young lady image, or the man's face and the woman. Our perceptions are an active process. They're picking things out. They're building a reality together. So when it comes to intuition, the same thing is happening. Our intuitive senses, our other faculties, they're picking out little bits of information, and when they come into our perceptual processing systems, they get colored. We have biases, we have fears, we have desires, our imagination can get in the way. So in Project Stargate, they created a method, a structure, basically a pen and paper methodology that you go through that helps reduce the imagination, reduce the noise, right? And so what does it look like? What's possible? We've all been shown images like these for throughout our life. You know what I mean? Are we going to be curled up in the bed seeing dead people? Do we need crystal balls, or are we going to be talking to reptilian overlords? Not quite. So I'm sorry if I disappointed you, but remote viewing doesn't involve any of these things. In reality, what we're really going to be doing looks more like this. We're simply going to be using a pen and paper and our own mental capacities, right? Our focus, our attention. Just like how you would sit down and write an essay, or you would write a poem or draw a picture. It can be underwhelming for some. Some people are expecting something grandiose and amazing, but the method of remote viewing that was developed for the military that I'm going to be highlighting here, this whole idea of CRV, controlled remote viewing, is done on a pencil and paper, wide awake, fully aware, and some people have a problem with this. This is why I wanted to help make this video to help people understand. I had people commenting on some of my videos saying, you're not remote viewing, you're standing up and you're talking and you're writing and this is impossible. Well, this is how controlled remote viewing is done, and it's done this way so that you reduce imagination, you reduce the noise. Well, if you were to actually, let's say, go into a trance or go to sleep to try and get intuitive information, which is possible, it's just you're increasing the chances of introducing noise. So this method of remote viewing is meant to keep you right in the middle. It's to balance you and keep you focused, keep your conscious mind distracted, doing the pen and paper work, while your subconscious mind is able to feed you this information. And yes, it can be done wide awake, totally eyes open, and you can be successful if you practice and really get a hang of these protocols. So a basic remote viewing experiment, and this is a very basic remote viewing experiment, is set up somewhat like this. You have a viewer who's awake and focused and relaxed, and they're working in a condition called blind. Now, this is also something that people have a misunderstanding about. Remote viewing, real remote viewing, is done blind. This means that the viewer, and when I say the viewer, I mean the person doing the remote viewing, they've been given no information about the target. And this is hard for people to wrap their minds around, because coming from a physicalist and a materialist perspective, it literally it's impossible, and it's most people can't even consider that this is happening. But this is the fact. This is how it works. The viewer is given nothing, no clue as to what the target is when this is done correctly. This is how it's supposed to be done. Once the viewer is awake, focused, working blind, they're going to go through the remote viewing protocol, and you have a target which is isolated from the viewer. So the viewer is isolated with their 5 senses. So this experiment is meant to test the claim that only the 5 senses can communicate information. So if we have the viewer isolated with their 5 senses in a room, pen and paper, and then we have a isolated target, which could be a person, a place, a thing, an event. In this example here, it's a person jumping off of this elevated platform. If done right, traditional tangible 5 sense information of touch, sight, hearing, smell, and taste will come out in the remote viewer's work. How does it get here? Well, we can argue about that all day. What I'm trying to explain here is not only do most people might think that psychic information is fantastic or something completely out of the norm from what we usually experience, but it's far from that. It's very familiar. You will get normal physical sensations in your remote viewing session. It's possible to get sights, smells, sounds, and tastes in a remote viewing session. It's not just drawing a picture or something like that. You know what I mean? So you will get tangible information and intangible information, such as emotions, thoughts, the ambience, conceptual ideas, right? Intentions, stuff like that. So the basic remote viewing experiment, this is what you're hoping to see. You're hoping to see information about the target appearing in the viewer's work, right? That's the gist of it. An isolated viewer with their five senses somehow describing, using their intuitive faculties to describe an isolated target, which has been selected and is known, not by the viewer. So what do I mean by this? What does this look like? What does it look like, this information appearing in a viewer's work? So, well, here's some examples. This is some work by Daz Smith. He's a UK remote viewer. His website, I'm going to show you his website a bit later. He's got great information on there. So here the target was the Sydney Opera House. Okay? Daz Smith was only given a target number, and I'm going to explain this in a little more detail later. But basically, here you can see he wrote lipped, heavy, regular structure, man-made, on the edge of a liquid interface. And he says, where the two meet. And he says, I feel that the water might be deeper than it should, and parts cover the structure. And he says, he draws a little sketch here, and he says, side view, and he wrote AOL Sydney. So he even wrote the word Sydney. AOL is, I'm going to explain this a little bit better in a moment. AOLs are ways for remote viewers to express a noun or name something without committing to it. So instead of a remote viewer saying, this is the Sydney Opera House, they would describe it in descriptive terms and use an AOL, which stands for analytical overlay, to use a noun. Like here, there's the AOL of port. In remote viewing, we try to refrain from using names because names are not descriptive. I could say there's a car. I see a car, or the target is a car. Well, we all know there's many, many, many different types of cars, different shapes and sizes. Nouns don't usually describe things so well. So to describe it as a lipped, heavy, regular structure on the edge of a liquid interface, that's a much better description. So yeah, here's an example of what that might look like. Here's some work that I did. The target was the Teton Mountains, and you can see here I've drawn some mountains, given some descriptions. Here's some work by Joe McMoneagle, who is a military viewer. So you see he's drawn the hills, drawn the posts. He's said that there's moving electricity in the form of a grid work. Intangible information that comes through during these sessions. And that's a great hit there. Here's a great one. This is by Dick Allgaier. The target was Keanu Reeves and Lawrence Fishburne doing their kung fu act in The Matrix. And here you can see he's drawn two men. Let me mind you here, these are all blind, like I said, and the viewer was only given a target number. So given this target ID, HUTI-RXCS, using only his intuition, Dick Allgaier was able to objectify this information. He says, two men face off. Man in black pops up and goes down. I clearly saw a man dressed in all dark clothes jump up, springs up quickly, and then another in light clothes circling, wary. Both in motion, looked like a competition or choreographed dance or fight. And off to the side, people are watching. Motion, athletic, acrobatic activity, some type of match or athletic competition, individuals jumping up and down, physical motion. Right? Here's some work that I did. The target was the whirling dervishes. This is a dance that's performed in Turkey. And you can see here I've drawn people, I've drawn these arrows and circular motions, and I've drawn a structure in the back. Here, came through in my session. Here's a great hit by viewer Michelle. You can see they've drawn the blimp and the tower there with the explosion. I believe this is by Joe McMonagle. Here he's illustrated the target, these archways. This is done by Rock. He was working a target on the death of King James III, and you can see here he had a great visual of King James there. He drew that. That's great stuff. Here's a target was the Valley Temple at Giza. You can see here the viewer has very good hit here. Picked up on the visual aspects of the target. Even said stones, entrance. Right. Here's some work that I did recently. Had a good visual capture. 3 men. The target was someone teaching martial arts, and I kept seeing these 3 guys with their arms bent, elbows bent, and arms bent. Something going on between them. Turned out it was these 3 guys here in a martial arts dojo. This was work done by Glenn Wheaton, I believe. The target was this man here, and you can see he's made some contact and was able to draw this person in quite good detail. So, what is the sequence of a remote viewing session? A lot of people are having troubles kind of conceptualizing how this works. So I want to kind of break this down. This is the order that a basic remote viewing experiment happens. There's many different configurations of this. You can have double blind, triple blind, outbounder. There's all types of different configurations. You could have blind analysis, blind judges. This is a basic remote viewing experiment between 2 people that I'm illustrating here. So the first thing that happens is a target is selected. So here we have Bob. Bob is going to be what we call the tasker. This is going to be the person who selects the target. This could also be done by a computer. There's many ways you could select the target, but in this example, we're using an individual. Bob is a tasker. He selects this circular walkway, wooden dock walkway on the shoreline. This is the target he selected. He's going to assign what we call a target ID to the target. Now, target IDs are not hints. They're not clues. They're more like a URL. On the internet, you click links and they take you to pages. The URL, in some cases, may have a name in it, and like www.youtube.com. You can know it's YouTube from the name of from the URL. But there's many URLs that are, random numbers and letters mixed together. You got to think of target numbers like URLs or addresses. It doesn't tell you anything about the target. It's more of a symbol that represents the target. So instead of Bob telling Joy, hey, remote view the shoreline for me, instead of saying that, Bob can tell Joy, the target is 19732. And that way, Joy can remain blind. Because like we said, all remote viewing, when done correctly, must be done blind. Right? So Joy is given the target number. So the first step is the target is selected. Second step is there's no communication between Bob and Joy. Joy is going to be the viewer. So between Bob and Joy, besides this target number, he gives her the target number, 19732. There's no other communication between them, right? Joy has her 5 senses, and she's isolated. She has no normal means of accessing the target or the target information. Joy will work the session. Joy will take the target 19732 and she'll do a remote viewing session. Let's say she produces this drawing. She'll take this drawing and she'll send it back to Bob. Bob will take the work in and he'll see that work has been submitted and he can compare it to the target, and then he'll be able to give the feedback. Feedback is the image, the result of the target, what the target really was. That's called giving feedback to your viewer. So you got to be able to give feedback to your viewer at the end of the session. So target selected, target number is assigned, viewer is given the target number, viewer works the session, viewer submits the work, and then only then is the viewer given the actual feedback to see what the target was. And then they can compare their work, what they produced, to the target. And as you can see here, this is actually some work that I did, just using Joy as an example here. Joy has drawn this circular structure and has said that it's in the water, and that's a pretty good hit. So in a basic remote viewing experiment, this is the kind of thing that can happen. This is how it can work. Is it going to work like this every time? No, and I think that's kind of one of the expectations that people have. They think that if someone's claims to be psychic or has some type of paranormal ability, that they should be able to just nail everything, or they should know everything. I always get comments like, "Hey, why haven't you won the lottery?" or stuff like this. It's a little more complicated than that, folks. So Jessica Utz is a statistician from the University of California, and she talks about this whole idea in her paper that she wrote, An Assessment of the Evidence for Psychic Functioning. And in it, she says she refutes the claims of fraud or experimental design, flaws in experimental design. I always get people telling me, or people in general who have difficulty looking at this information, experiencing cognitive dissonance, they'll usually say, there must be something wrong with the experiment. You know what I mean? Someone's cheating. How can we believe this? I have videos of the experiments with Uri Geller posted on my YouTube channel, and I always get people saying, Uri Geller used magic tricks to fool the CIA and the scientists, and Amazing Randy has debunked psychic abilities and all this kind of stuff. Well, the truth of the matter is that psychic functioning, or psi, intuition, is much like any other human behavior. It's not that easy to just reproduce in a lab. A lab is not a normal operating condition of a person. You know what I mean? So it's like hitting a home run or getting a hole in one in golf or hitting a bullseye. Of course, people can hit home runs. No one's debating whether Babe Ruth can hit a home run or Mark McGwire is capable of hitting home runs. But just because he doesn't hit one every game doesn't mean that home runs are impossible, right? Just because Tiger Woods doesn't sink a hole-in-one every match doesn't mean that hole-in-ones don't exist. And it's the same thing with psychic functioning. Jessica Utz says here in her paper, she says, arguments that these results could be due to methodological flaws in the experiments are soundly refuted. Effects of similar magnitude to those found in government-sponsored research at SRI and SAIC have been replicated at a number of laboratories across the world. Such consistency cannot be readily explained by claims of flaws or fraud. So, to the trolls saying that, Uri Geller fooled the CIA with magic tricks, which is highly unlikely. They spent over $20 million investigating these things. You know what I mean? It's the CIA. These effects have been repeated across many labs over many years. So the claims of fraud or flaws in the method of the experiment, they don't hold. So I encourage people to really look into this and stop just parroting what you hear in the lamestream, because it's purely misinformation. She says here, few human capabilities are perfectly replicable on demand. For example, even the best hitters in Major League Baseball cannot hit on demand, nor can we predict when someone will hit or when they will score a home run. In fact, we can't even predict whether or not a home run will occur in a particular game. That does not mean that home runs don't exist. The same should be true of psychic functioning. Even if there truly is an effect, it may never be replicable on demand in the short run, even if we understand how it works. However, over the long run, in well-controlled laboratory experiments, we should see a consistent level of functioning above that expected by chance. And that's exactly what we've seen. And this is a really important part to take in here, folks. This is a human ability. We're not 100% at anything, right? So you got to take that into account when you're considering psychic functioning or even trying to take control of it yourself. You know what I mean? Trying to experience it and get in touch with your intuitive capabilities. It's like playing a sport. It's like a skill set. You're gonna have to practice. Not only have to practice, it's not gonna always be 100% repeatable, right? So, what is this structure that was developed? What is the structure? How does it work, right? The structure that I'm going to be highlighting here is called open source controlled remote viewing. This is based on the research and what was developed at SR International during the Stargate project. It's a slightly loose version. This manual that I'm going to be highlighting here was created by Daz Smith, who is a remote viewer from the UK. His website is www.remoteviewed.com. And he has a great book. He has a couple great books, but I highly recommend. He has a book called CRV, Controlled Remote Viewing, and it has the military manual for controlled remote viewing. And I highly recommend that book. And I highly recommend you go over to his website and download the open source CRV manual, which I'm going to be going over in brief detail here. It's free. It describes the stages of remote viewing, and if studied seriously, you can definitely use this tool. And I've studied it for the last couple of years, and I've had success, and I'm going to share some of that with you, as I've been doing on my YouTube. But I want to get into a little more detail to help people grasp how this information surfaces, right? Because that's really what the devil's in the details, folks. You got to get really specific in this area if you want to really understand how it works and have any chance of using it yourself, right? So the structure. CRV is a 6-stage process that was created. And each stage allows for different kinds of information to manifest. All right? The point of a structure, of a methodology or structure, and there's many different methodologies, might I add. CRV, or controlled remote viewing, is not the only methodology for remote viewing. So, I understand when people comment and say, hey, this isn't remote viewing, I've remote viewed and I did it like this and that. Well, the version of remote viewing that I'm trying to explain here and trying to get people to look at is called open source controlled remote viewing. It's based on the research done at SRI in the government programs. And for me, so far, this has been the method that has allowed me to experience the most success. And I feel like I've, gotten the hang of it. You know what I mean? Gotten somewhat of the hang of it. So the methodology, the point of a methodology is to keep the conscious mind occupied and guide the intention of the viewer, because intention is very important in remote viewing. Whatever you're focused on is what your subconscious is going to give you the information for. So it's kind of like it's like aiming your perceptive faculties, so to speak. You want to keep your mind focused on the right thing. You don't want your mind drifting off into what you did yesterday, or drifting off into imagination about something that could be related to the target. So structures are made to set some groundwork. Do this, do that, do that. And if you do it all right, if you do it all at a right pace, and you're following the structure, that allows your subconscious mind to pass these bits of information through the threshold of awareness. That's what remote viewing structures are designed to do. They all essentially do the same thing, which is guide your intention and help you get these small pieces of perceptions, which in the end will create a larger view of the target. So in stage 1, we're dealing with basic gestalts, right? Every stage of remote viewing, it's like taking steps up of a ladder. Or a metaphor for this is the opening of an aperture. So you can see here on this image here, stage 1 is like looking through a tiny little peephole, informationally speaking. You're going to get low-level information. We call these basic gestalts. And stage 2 introduces sensory data. You will start perceiving colors, smells, tastes, temperatures, sounds, stuff like that, dimensions. Then we get to stage 3. Stage 3 opens the aperture a little bit more. Now you're going to be getting dimensional data, advanced sensory data. Stage 4, that aperture opens even wider, and now we're getting advanced sensory and dimensional data and the freedom to explore. So you can move your point of view, so to speak, around the target and collect information from different places around the target. This opens up to stage 5, where more information is squeezed out of any impressions that you got in stage 4. And it finishes off with stage 6, which is a little bit less. I don't see many people doing stage 6s that much anymore, but this is where you would do a clay modeling or some kind of physical modeling of the target to get more data out of it. So CRV is a protocol. It's much like the internet. Internet has a protocol. You got to type http / www. You got to follow certain protocols in order to get your information where it needs to go, and in order to receive information. You have to have an IP address. You got to have a MAC address. There's all this information being sent back and forth through different servers. It's kind of like that with remote viewing. If you want to get clear information, if you want to get the information that you're hoping to get, following this address, this target number, you got to follow the protocols if you want to get the right information. And you have to be willing to objectify the information that comes to you. That's a whole nother part. So, 6-stage process of CRV. How does it work? So I'm going to try and break down each stage, up to stage 4, and I'm going to, give a little insight, some examples of some work that I've done, and hopefully this can help people understand how this all comes together, because it is confusing and it is hard to get a grasp on if you don't know what's going on, right? So CRV, open source CRV, starts with what's called an ideogram. This is stage 1. Now, an ideogram is your subconscious's way of communicating the main gestalts of a target. So I often get the question, I'll post a video, a remote viewing video. Let's say I have a target. I worked a target that was the death of Princess Diana. So it's a popular video. So I get a lot of people asking me, how do you know what the question is? So if the target is the death of Princess Diana, and I'm only given a target number, let's say A, B, C, D, E, F, G, how does A, B, C, D, E, F, G tell me what to view, right? This is a question that people often ask. They think there's some kind of clue or hint in the target number, or maybe some people actually think that I've been asked the question, that the viewer is asked the question up front. Viewers are always blind, okay? So how do you know what's at the target? How does a viewer begin, kind of like get that first grip on the target? Well, it's through an ideogram. And this happens in stage 1. So what is an ideogram? An ideogram is a reflexive mark made by the viewer when first contacting the target. So ideograms, this is from Dan Smith's open source CRV manual. He says, ideograms to me are like a personal language. Everyone has a different way of doing them. Ideograms generally take 2 forms. Single, which is a single drawing that represents a single target element, or a multiple ideogram, and that's an ideogram with several linked drawings showing several target elements. So this is what some basic ideograms look like. Now, there's different views on ideograms. Some people, there's different schools of thought on ideograms. Some people say that ideograms should always be unique. Every ideogram should be unique. They should never look the same. You shouldn't be trying to look for any sort of pattern in your ideograms. And then there's another school of thought that drills ideograms, kind of like programs ideograms into your subconscious language, so to speak. So a flat line would mean land. A right angle ideogram would mean a structure. An ideogram like this would mean a life form, and so on and so forth. A squiggly line would mean water. So this is a way of your subconscious mind to give you that first bit of information about the target. So given only the target number, a viewer is able to produce an ideogram. And the ideogram explains gestalts. Now, what's a gestalt? A gestalt is an organized whole that is perceived as more than the sum of its parts. So a gestalt is, you've probably heard the word the gist. I get the gist of it. This comes from the word gestalt, which is kind of like you get the overall meaning or the overall framework of what this thing is. So each of these ideograms represent gestalts. So a water gestalt could be anything. It could be a river, a lake, a puddle, a hose with water in it. The gestalt behind that is water. Do you understand? Land, a land gestalt. Any target, anywhere where there's land, you might get a land gestalt. It doesn't tell you anything too specific, but it tells you the main overall gist of the target. So, for example, down here, this ideogram, this is a multiple ideogram. So you can see there's 1, 2, 3 different ideograms in this multiple ideogram, and each part represents something different. So there's a right angle here for a structure, there's a life form ideogram, and then there's a water ideogram. So if I were to work a target, or a remote viewer works a target, and they produce an ideogram, for example, that would look like this, that would mean that the target has structure, it has some sort of life form or life forms, and it has water at the target. So I hope that kind of answers your question as to how does a viewer know what to view, or how does the target number give you any insight into what the target is? Well, it's through ideograms. The target number itself doesn't mean anything. It's just an arbitrary random letters or numbers. It's just used to give a sort of a starting point for the viewer. This is all done intuitively. This is all through the subconscious. The subconscious knows what the target is. It sees the target number A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and it already knows what the target is. All it has to do now is pass that information into your conscious awareness. And in CRV, this starts with doing an ideogram. So it's translating this information through the body and giving it to you, right? So you can think of ideograms as like zip files or .rar files. If you've ever, if you're tech savvy, these are like compressed computer files. If you ever use like WinZip, these were more popular back in the day. You would download something, it would come in a file that you wouldn't be able to open unless you had a special program. And once you open it with that program, there's all these other files hidden inside. And these files are those are the files you actually wanted, right? So it's like a compressed, encoded package of information. That's how an ideogram is. So it starts with something like structure or life form or water, but this is more like a compressed, encoded package. And the whole stages of CRV is kind of like unpacking these ideograms, so to speak. So how do we unpack them? How do we get information out of these ideograms? We probe them, and this is you take the tip of the pen and you touch the ideogram. So it's a tactile, kinesthetic method here. Probing, you're touching the pen onto the line of the ideogram, and intuitive information comes to the viewer. So let's take a look. I want to kind of break down this whole idea of gestalts so you can get a better idea of how a viewer gets onto target at the beginning of a session, right? So the basic gestalts is how your subconscious sees the target in the beginning of a session. So if this was the target, for example, the main gestalts here, the gestalts that one would expect to come out in an ideogram, what an analyst or the judge would be looking for, or the viewer when he gets his feedback, you'd be looking for water and a life gestalt. Those are the two main gestalts in this target here. There's water and there's a living thing. So life and water are the two main gestalts. The basic gestalts in a target like this would be a structure. There's a man-made structure here. There's some form of life. There's people inside. And then there's this rotational energy, the spinning of the propellers. These are the kind of gestalts that are likely to come out in the ideograms of a remote viewing session, the first stage. So if a viewer is blind to a target like this, once they produce their ideogram, you could expect them to produce ideograms like land, life, and some kind of motion, energy, or object. These are the kind of like the main elements, the main gestalts in this target. These come together, and these things coming together make the target. And as you unpack the information behind these gestalts, you get a bigger, a clearer description of the target. Let's say the target was this house on fire, this building on fire. Some of the gestalts that one would expect to see in their ideograms in stage 1 would be structure, life, water, land, and probably some kind of energy, right? So these using ideograms in stage 1, the target number will produce gestalts, and the gestalts, when done right, if you're producing a legitimate ideogram that was actually an impulse from your subconscious, it will produce matching gestalts to the target. So the subconscious sees the target in a different way than your conscious mind does, and you have to keep these things in mind. This is what the protocols are for, the stages. The subconscious mind sees the target in a very gestaltic form in the stage 1. So a target like this would just be life, water. A target like this would be structure, life, motion, and energy. A man hitting a baseball, the gestalts behind this would be like motion, energy, object, land, and life. And for the house on fire in stage 1, you'd be expecting to get ideograms that communicate structure, life, land, water, and energy, right? So I wanted to put these little video clips in here to help further illustrate the point. Okay, so here's me at the beginning of a session. The target is the Teton Mountains. It says, this is the target specific. It says, target description. 10 mountains, perspective, from the camera's perspective as shown in the photograph. The smoke and haze at the base of the mountains is from the fires in the nearby Yellowstone National Park in 1988. So the target is this mountain range. As you can see, the main gestalts in this target would be structure, the natural structure of the mountains, the land, of course, and this energy. It says there's a haze at the base of the mountain from some fires. So this would usually is picked up as some type of energy in a gestaltic form. So here I am. I'm blind to the target. I have no idea what the target is. All I know is target 122. So back to the question of how does a viewer know what the target is, or how does he get the first clue, or how does he get on target? This is how, through the use of ideograms. The target number itself doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have anything in it. It's only used to produce an ideogram. It's like that first little kickoff to give you that first impulse. So I'm going to play this little video clip here, and you'll see that I produce an ideogram and I identify the main gestalts at the target. So this is how a remote viewing session is kicked off. T122. A feels like land. I've identified one as land. B, energy, some type of energy or motion. C, there's a structure, and then a structure. So I produced an ideogram. Here it is. I've taken a screenshot of it. And this is a multiple ideogram, as I was describing earlier. Ideograms can come out as single or multiple. This is a multiple ideogram, and it had 3 elements, 3 gestalts in it, which I identified as structure, energy, and land. So hopefully you can see how, starting from no information, only the target number, within 30 seconds, not even, I was able to find out what the main gestalts of the target were through the use of an ideogram, and starting to decode the ideograms. So that's how stage 1 works. So in the case of, let's say, the Princess Diana target, for example, my ideograms had life, energy and motion, a structure, stuff like that. So stage 1 is gestaltic contact. You're getting that overall gist of the target. So in this example, the target is structure, energy, and land. Then that's where we start from. And it's done through the use of ideograms. So after stage 1, we move on to stage 2. Now, stage 2 is all about sensory data. So in this stage, you're mainly going to be dealing with 5 sense type data, like 5 physical sense type data. Colors, textures, sounds, smells, tastes, temperatures, and early dimensional information. So, for example, if this was the target here, this forest fire, in stage 2, some of the information you might intuit in stage 2 would be, for colors, you might see red, orange, black, brown, green, and white. For sounds, you might get impressions of crackling, hissing, thudding, crunching, a low hum. You might perceive smells and tastes of bitter, burnt, earthy, ash, smoke, and charred. Temperatures of hot and very hot and warm. You may feel textures of grooved, sharp, brittle, crusty, particulate, mushy, splintering wood, stuff like that. You may perceive dimensional qualities of tall, repeated verticals, cylindrical, swirling, open area. These are the kinds of information that would bubble up into the conscious mind during stage 2, right? And it's usually in the form of a list in the protocol. So stage 1 is gestaltic contact. You're identifying the main gestalts. Is there land? Is there air? Is there water? Is there people? Stage 2, you're starting to get physical sensations, smells, taste, touch, temperatures, dimensionals. These are the kinds of information that are prevalent in stage 2. So a lot of people watch my videos and they may be kind of confused as to, some of them say, oh, it's vague, or, how come you haven't drawn this an amazing picture? How come your picture doesn't look exactly like the target? Or the information comes in different stages. It comes in different forms. And at this early stage in the session, it's more important that you move forward through the protocol than it is. You're not supposed to stop and think about these things. You're not supposed to be logically analyzing this information. For example, it's very common in stage 2 to perceive things that are the opposite of each other. So, for example, in this image, let's say there's a part of the forest that is not burning. It's not hot. There's no fire there. You may feel a temperature of cool, and then immediately after, your next impression may be very hot. Or you may feel a texture of hard and rough, and then feel something smooth right after. These things contradict each other, and your logical mind would want to edit and leave one out. You'd say, oh, well, if something's wet, there's no way it can be dry. I just said the target was wet. How can I say it's dry? Well, in reality, wet and dry things do coincide beside each other. They do coexist. And that's why it's in these early stages, the protocol is meant to move you through. Just keep moving. You're meant to give your impressions, and not really stop to think about these kind of things at this point in the session. So stage 2 is all about sensory data. So stage 1 is gestalts. Stage 2, you're unpacking the sensory data out of these gestalts. Okay, so here's a little video clip of me doing a stage 2, collecting some sensory impressions about a target. So the target here is the Space Shuttle Challenger explosion. So my writing my writing here is a bit messy, but this is why I do these on video, to record the audio as well. So I make every entry that I write on the board, I'm saying it out loud so I can get it in writing and in audio. So you'll see here I'm going to produce an ideogram. I identify the ideogram as energy. As you can see, this is an energetic target. And then I begin to list the stage 2 sensory data. So listen closely, and you'll see how this information comes through. Even some of the dimensional information starts to come through. And this is how it is. This is how it happens live. This is not a reenactment. This is not... this is the information as it comes through. I'm objectifying it as it comes through. This is how the CRV process is tailored. This is how it's made. As you perceive something or you have an impression, you objectify it immediately. So I'm going to play this clip here. Listen closely, and this is stage 2.
9D3JX8Q. And curvy, down, curvy, erratic, B. Energy.
I just identified the gestalt as energy.
Rounded, black, yellow, white,
Colors.
red, brown, gray, curvy, hot, open, yeah, wide,
You see that I've drawn this puffy
curvy,
shape
almost
here.
like puffy. Yeah, gray, white, red, yellow, dusty, almost smoky.
So as you can see there, I listed a bunch of colors that I was perceiving: black, red, yellow, gray, white. I had temperatures of hot, dimensionals of wide, kind of like this rounded, puffy, smoky, textures of smoky and smells of smoky. This is stage 2 contact. So the ideogram was produced, started from target number, no information about the target, produced an ideogram. From the ideogram, it was intuited that this is an energy gestalt. And then from the energy gestalt, I was able to receive impressions about the shape, the texture, the colors, the temperatures of the target. So you can see how stage 2 builds on top of stage 1. And it can happen very fast. That was all within 30, 40 seconds. That information builds up very fast. So you're dealing with information on demand here. The subconscious has access to the information, and it's as your attention goes through the protocols, these bits of information are being brought to the surface for you to objectify. So from stage 2, we move on to stage 3. Stage 3 is all about sketching. So this stage allows you to expand on the growing data from stage 1 and 2 by allowing you to sketch the target. The military CRV manual goes into detail on the different forms of sketches. There's spontaneous sketches, analytical sketches, and there's something called trackers. To be simple, stage 3 is all about sketching the target or parts of the target. And this is important here. The sketches can look like the actual target or parts of it, or it can just be a basic representation of shapes and forms of the target. The main point of stage 3 sketches is to stimulate the flow of data and generate a larger flow of information. Okay? And this is important. A lot of people get caught up on the drawings in remote viewing, in CRV particularly. Remote viewing is a bit of a misnomer for this style of intuitive information access, because there's times when there are no visuals. You're not perceiving a visual, so to speak, but the impressions that you get can be illustrated. So stage 3 is not so much about drawing the target to look exactly what it looks like. But it's great if that happens. If you're able to produce a drawing that looks like the target, that's great. That's amazing. But really, the point of stage 3 is to produce more flow of data. There's been times in sessions where I just draw a random line, a straight line, and through probing that line, you can get real data out of the target that's relevant to the target. So the sketches are more like symbols that you use to facilitate more flow. So don't get caught up on the sketch looking exactly like the target. It can represent it vaguely. It can have some of the overall shapes of the target. For example, here the target was the London Tower Bridge, and you can see here I've sketched some things that look like the framework here. I've sketched the part of the tower. What's really important is probing these sketches and getting more information. It builds on stage 2 now, and you're kind of getting deeper. That aperture is opening. You're getting a clearer view, informational view of the target. Information starts coming in clusters at this point. Once you start getting your sketches and you start interrogating your sketches for information, new kinds of information are going to bubble up because you're bringing your focus and your attention is moving around these different parts of the target, and your subconscious faculties, your other senses are going to give you this information. It's going to feed you this information up. So stage 3. Here's the target that I worked. The video's on YouTube. The target is Chan Beori in Rajasthan, and this is an ancient step well. It's like a ancient structure. It goes down below the ground, and there's all types of tourists and events that go on here. It's not used for what it used to be used anymore. It's more like a memorial now. But the main elements of this target here, you can see manifest in my stage 3. So I want to play this clip to kind of help people understand how the sketching works. It's not that I literally saw this target. I didn't see this target and draw it. This is turning subtle impressions that that bubble up inside, and you're turning them into illustrations. So it's not as clear cut as just seeing an image and drawing it. That can happen. You can see visuals, but usually that's not, at least for me, that's not how it usually happens in CRV. So you'll see here in this video clip, this is a real session. I'm working for the first time on video. I have no idea what the target is, and you can see I'm struggling with my perceptions and trying to communicate it in a coherent way, because usually remote viewing is done on, CRV is done on paper and pencil, and you don't have to narrate to anyone. There's no one watching you. You're just handing in your paperwork. When I'm doing these video sessions, I'm trying to explain what's happening as it happens. So hopefully you can see here how the elements of the target come out in my sketch, and how the probing of these sketches facilitates even more data, and it leads me eventually to giving a fairly good description of the target. So here we go.
Let's move.
I move
above the target.
I position myself above the target for the
1,
sketch.
207 2001. And something like this. Yeah, so this is A, B, C, and this is D. A feels like rising, tall, flat. Yeah, flat, like rising. White, bright. AOL, like a tower, obelisk. Yeah, this feels rough. B feels like open. Yeah, it feels like a boxy. Maybe inside. There's a. This feels important. Important. Yeah, there might be a movement in there or something. C, long, wide, feels like almost narrow. Feels open inside. I see yellow, I see white, maybe deep. AOL, like a chamber. Like, it reminds me of, the temples, like, right beside the Great Pyramid? They have parts, it's like temples that are just under the ground, like, inset into the ground. Like, if this is the surface, they got, like, stuff down here. Like, they got structures, little walkways below the level of the ground. That's what C part reminds me of that. And then we got D, and D feels like almost like a perimeter. Almost like rising like a barrier. Yeah, black, tall, long. Yeah, surrounding. AOL, like a fence. So, here, from above the target, it feels like we have some kind of perimeter area, something rising, almost like a barrier type thing, a perimeter around the outside. Then we have what seems like a couple different structures within, some type of rising, tall, white edged rising thing, structure like this. There's an open boxy area or structure. It feels like there might be movement here, and then there's a long, narrow, feels open inside. I see yellowish white, and yeah, this is my from above the target. There's my sketch. A couple different elements here. 3 structures.
So as you can see there in that stage 3, the overall shape and form of the target came through in my sketch from above. I drew an outside perimeter, a boxy area, some type of, I had an AOL of an obelisk, a tower, something that reminded me of like a tower, so the elements of, and then I also had the AOL of a structure that goes below the ground, a temple that recedes into the ground. So you can see at the beginning of the little clip, I simply had some squares. I drew some lines on the board that didn't really mean much, but as I labeled them and probed them for more information, I was able to deduce all the information about, a barrier, a wall, a fence, a tower, a movement on the inside, something a structure that goes like a temple that goes beneath the ground under the surface of the land. This is the point of stage 3. It's not to draw the target perfectly and be like, wow, look at my great drawing. It's to get information. What we want to do is get information about the target. That's what's important. In CRV, that's the main goal here, to get information free from imagination and noise. That's the main goal here. So hopefully that clip kind of can help people to start to understand how this information comes through. It's not one instant knowing and seeing the whole target and then explaining it all at once. It's literally like problem solving. You're getting small pieces and you're feeling them out, and you're probing for information, and you're building it up as you go. This is how remote viewing, this is how CRV works. It's different than what most people would expect this kind of thing to be. Most people think of it would be very obvious and clean cut type of process, but it is challenging. It's like creating a piece of art or working on a complex puzzle. You know what I mean? You got to juggle the pieces around. You got to feel things out sometimes. Hopefully that little video clip there kind of helped illustrate how we create an ideogram. The ideogram gives you sensory impressions. From the sensory impressions, now we create a sketch, and then from the sketch, we're probing for even deeper information on the elements that we sketch. All right. And then after stage 3, we move on to what's called stage 4, and this is fun. This is where a lot of the fun can happen in controlled remote viewing. So Daz says here, by this stage, your aperture to the target should be fairly wide, and the sketching from previous stage should have triggered streams of small clusters of data, like I just showed. This is where the matrix comes in. The structure of the matrix allows you to record the data in managed columns. This helps keep the data managed and helps keep you, the viewer, focused. So stage 4 is called the matrix, not like the movie, but it's a data collection matrix. Stage 4 allows the viewer to take control of the pace and flow of data and to tease and work as much data as possible from the target. I personally love the way that in stage 4 I can move around, touching, tasting, and smelling the target from any position. Also remember that within the stage 4 matrix, because the data flow is advanced now, you might get an urge to draw a sketch. If you do then sketch, once you have, try probing the sketch. Put your pen on part of the sketch and then ask questions like, what does this part feel like? What's the temperature? What color is this? Remembering to record the probe data by the side of the sketch or in the matrix as new information. Above all else, ask questions, move around, investigate. You are in total control here. So a lot of people, I've seen people online refer to the term of controlled remote viewing as being something negative, thinking that the viewer is being controlled by someone else, or something like this. But actually, controlled remote viewing means the viewer is in control, actually. And it's through the use of things like the stage 4 matrix that give the viewer the ability to move around and ask questions to themselves about the target, and to intuit the information and get in a direct knowing of things about the target. So the stage 4 matrix is divided into a bunch of columns. I'm just going to go over these really quickly. There's a stage 2 column, which is where you're going to be getting more data that is similar to stage 2 stuff. So like smells, colors, tastes, temperatures, sounds. There's a spot for those in stage 4. The stage 4 matrix has a spot for every kind of information, that any type of perception that comes to you will have a spot in the S4 matrix for you to put it. So this is literally the stage where you're dumping everything that comes to your mind. Anything that comes to your mind during this stage, when you probe these columns, it will have a place to go. So no bit of information should be left unrecorded. So there's stage 2 data, the sensories. Then you have a column for dimensions, which is you record all the dimensional data for the target. In stage 4, the dimensions usually get more complex. You might say like twisted, spires, sectioned, edged, long, compact, boxed, stuff like that. Then there's a column called AI, and this is for aesthetic impact. And this is how the viewer records their own feelings about the target. So, I don't like this place. This place makes me happy. This feels like death. Stuff like that go in that column. This is a column for information about how the viewer feels personally about the target, or how the target makes the viewer feel personally. EI is emotional impact. And in this column, you're recording the emotions of people or life forms at the target, or of yourself at the target. Sometimes different structures or locations even have an emotional feel to them, right? So like a war zone, or a church, or maybe a sacrificial ground. These will have an emotional, intangible emotional type of information attached to them, which you may pick up when you probe the EI columns. So in this stage 4, you're putting your pen in each column, and you're getting an impulse of information as you go through. The T column is for tangibles. Like we were speaking of this before. Tangibles are things you can touch, real physical objects. So in the T column, you'd be saying, oh, there's chairs at the target, there's trees, there's people, there's stone, rock, metal, wood, stuff like that. Whereas the intangible column, like we were saying earlier, the difference between tangible and intangible sensing, these are the opposite of tangibles. And these are things that can't be touched, right? So like medical, foreign, religious, business, government, spiritual, scientific, purposeful. These are intangible types of information that are very important if you're trying to gain a description of a target. You know what I mean? You can't touch spiritual. You can't touch religious, business. These are intangible concepts that can be communicated from your subconscious to your conscious mind. And intangibles column is actually one of my favorite. I find that I'm good at picking up on intangible information. AOLs, as I was explaining, this is called an analytical overlay, and this is where usually the viewer will get either a very strong concept, or the name of something, or a very clear image of something will pop into the mind, and usually it can feel like guessing, like you're trying to guess something. This is where you will write it in the AOL column. It's kind of like, let's say, for example, the target is a tower of some sort. The viewer may get impressions like tall, round, tall, hard, and now this may start triggering things in their imagination or inside of them that makes them think, oh, it's a lighthouse. That's like a guess, right? So they would write AOL lighthouse. So it's still recorded because an AOL usually has things in your AOL are usually correct. Like, for example, a lighthouse is similar to a tower. They're both structures that rise up in a vertical fashion. So as you work more remote viewing sessions and you get these AOLs every once in a while, after a while you begin to see how your AOLs, you're coloring the information with your AOLs. There's some kind of valid information that your subconscious is giving you, but by the time it reaches your conscious mind, you've colored it. You've added concepts to it. You've given it a name, and now it's probably not correct anymore, but there's still information to glean from it. That's why we write those in the AOL column. And then you have AOL over the signal, which is similar to the AOL, but this is when you feel that the AOL that you're trying to explain, like let's say lighthouse, for example, you feel that it is very similar to the target. Like you're taking a guess, but you're pretty sure that your guess is very, very, very similar to the target. That's what AOL over the signal is about. So stage 4 matrix is one of my favorite parts. It allows you to really, get some much more specific detail than stage 2. Stage 2 is just like I said, the 5 sense information. You're not really getting into the conceptuals or intangible type information, which is usually the kind of stuff that you want to get to if you want to give more than just a physical description. So here's a little clip of some stage 4s that I did on a target working it's an art gallery in Moscow. So here you'll see I probe the sensories column, I probe the tangibles column and intangibles column, and you're working through these columns and asking yourself questions. So for example, in this clip I'm about to show, I probe the tangibles column and I draw a rectangle. So I get the impression of some kind of rectangle. From there, I then probe the sensories column to see, okay, I drew this rectangle, what sensories are associated with the rectangle, right? And then from there, I probe the intangibles column to say what intangibles are associated with the rectangle. So the stage 4 matrix is like this puzzle. It's like putting together the puzzle pieces. You're asking all these questions, you're getting all this data, and hopefully by the end of it, you're able to come to some kind of recognition of the target by the time your session's done. Or maybe your analyst will be able to dig through the target and see the parts of the target where you were picking up on target elements. So in this stage 4, I'm going to show a couple different segments from the video. One, I'm describing a picture frame. Another, I'm describing the interior of the structure. So stage 4, it's a lot of fun. So check this out.
Tangible. Let's see.
And I am struggling here with these impressions because I'm blind to the target.
Sensories.
So now I'm probing the sensories related to this.
Yellowish, golden. I see this pattern. It's hard to explain what I'm seeing here. It reminds me of an expensive frame. Yeah, it reminds me of an expensive frame. Those frames on pictures that have carved carvings on the border, little designs and stuff going around the outside.
Here I'm drawing
Sensories dimensions.
my matrix,
tangible,
and I'm probing for information about the
AOL,
structure.
Intangible.
Intangibles.
So location, structure. It's designated. keeps things. Keep things. Do they keep things in here? Maybe. Something about viewing.
Slowly, the information's building on each other. They keep things in there. It's about viewing.
Okay, yeah, I guess it's like.
And now I get a mental image.
Like idea of like I see these things like lined up like this. I see that they're lined up like one after the other.
I'm probing again.
Tangible. Yeah. It's like feels like I'm going by these like you're passing by these as you go. Passing by. Sensory dimensions. AI, tangible, intangible, AOL, the signal. Tangible.
Probing the tangibles column.
It's like
I got a visual, walls.
it's like intangible. Yeah, there's movement. There's movement. Intangible. Okay. It feels like these are here. There's like things here are here and here and yeah, there's like movement in here. Yeah, there's like movement. Intangible. People moving around in here. Yeah, people. Yeah. So it feels like intangible. Yeah, it's like an event or something. Like a viewing. It's like a gallery. Yeah, so this part feels like inside it feels like maybe it's like these walls, these things on the walls, it feels like, and there's like this movement here, all around here, people moving in here. Feels like an event or something. Intangible. It's organized. Yeah, paths. Like, like, it reminds me of, like, they have those, inside of somewhere, they got those little lineups where you gotta walk in between the railings. Like, there's, like, those rails that, when you're at the movies or something, and you're waiting in line, like, you start here, you gotta, like, walk here, and then there. Like, it feels like there's organized paths in here. Intangible. Yeah. The paths take you to, like, these spots. Like, the paths take you around to, like, the optimal points of observation. Yeah. The organized paths take you around to the optimal points of observation. That's what it feels like there.
So yeah, as you can see there, the information builds up. You gotta probe, you gotta ask yourself questions. It comes in concepts, ideas. Some of it comes in visual, some of it comes in ideas, some of it comes in intuitive knowings. you can see I kind of have like a little aha moment there at the end. I'm like, oh, the paths take you to the optimal points of observation, and I'm kind of like declaring it like I figured out something amazing. But it's like that's how it feels when you're in doing a remote viewing session. At times, it's like you're this close to getting this full perception, but it's just feeding you these. It's like pulling on a little string. You know what I mean? You're always unsure, but there's always the next piece of information coming. So it's more of learning how to trust your own perceptions. This video is a little bit old. I'm a bit better now at going with what I get and not hesitating as much. But as you can see, using the stage 4 matrix, you can take it to the next level in terms of target contact. You can start asking deeper questions. I even said it's like a gallery. People walking around in there. There's little paths that take you around to the best spots to view. This is the kind of detail that can come out in stage 4, and it can get even more detailed than that. Most of these sessions I work on video, or some of them are only an hour or 40 minutes. So when it comes to very complex targets and getting very detailed information, usually you're going to want to work a little bit longer than that sometimes, or maybe even work multiple sessions if you're trying to work something really, really complex, like a murder. Like I have some video sessions that I've done on murders or assassinations, and being blind to the target, I didn't know what the target was going to be. I didn't know it was going to be a murder case. So, I only have a half an hour, sometimes an hour to do these videos. So a lot of people say, oh, you're so vague, you didn't describe that, you didn't do that, you didn't do that. Well, it's like I only had a half an hour, an hour to do this thing, and I'm working blind by myself. So it's challenging sometimes, and I'm not really I don't do these do the remote viewing videos to try and give some kind of authoritative take on what happened to someone when they got murdered. I'm simply doing a remote viewing experiment. I'm just trying to see if I can describe something that's even close to what the target is. You get what I mean? I'm just trying to see if the information manifests through my intuition in my session. I'm not really concerned with whether someone believes that's what I described happened or not. I'm trying to match the description to the target feedback. That's it. I'm not trying to start conspiracy theories about what happened at this or that event. That's not the point of my videos. So I hope that clears it up for some people that kind of accuse me of this or that. And that's not really the point. I'm trying to explore remote viewing and make it publicly accessible, and spread some knowledge on it through my videos. That's really the point. Not to show off and act like I have an authoritative view on some event that happened. That's not the point. So here's another little take on the stage 4 matrix. This is from an older paper session that I did. So this one's on paper. How remote viewing CRV is traditionally done on paper. The target was something called the Singing Tower, and it's built on this kind of like sanctuary ground. It's got like a bell tower up there. It says here it's Gothic Revival, Art Deco architecture. Some important points here that came out in my session. It's square at the base, but it changes at 150 feet to an octagon at the top. And then it has sculptures designed by Lee Lowry built into the structure. So you can see here at the very top, you got these birds perched up there, these carved birds. You got other little things inscribed and sculpted into the building. Here you can see in my stage 3, I've taken a screenshot here. I drew a structure, and you can argue the gestaltic features of the target have come through in my sketch. And I did a movement order. I moved above the target, and I even sketched an octagon. So this is what I mean by a lot of the information in remote viewing is it's different than what you expect. It's not that you might not see anything sometimes, but you'll get a knowing, or you'll put your hand on the paper and just start drawing something, and you'll feel it out. This is a different kind of This is not your traditional logical linear thought. We're using the intuitive part of the mind. We're using the creative part. You're tapping into the subconscious mind that has all these other senses and receptors that are deducing information. And if you practice and trust yourself, you can take control and learn how to transduce this information and objectify it correctly. So I'm going to play this little clip here. The audio might be a little rough, so I've listed pretty much all the points that I've stated here, just in case anyone cannot hear what I'm saying. But I'm in my stage 4 matrix, and I'm probing for information in relation to this singing tower target. So listen closely, and you'll see how some pretty specific data can come out in your S4, and it can happen fast and unexpected. So this is the whole point of the protocol, to keep you moving forward, to keep the information flowing through. So check this out.
Intangibles. Man-made.
Said man-made.
Feels religious. Spiritual. Older. Rustic. Yeah, well, the signal, I must say Gothic.
Yeah, the AOL, the signal of Gothic, which is actually correct. It's a Gothic revival Art Deco tower.
Old European. Tangibles.
Here I probe the tangibles column, and you can see I'm having an intuitive moment. There's an idea is flashing in my mind. Ideas are coming, an image is coming to my mind.
It's got like things like this is the roof. It's got like things on it. Ornaments, designs, like flanking, like how old style buildings have like gargoyles and animals carved into them. AOL is a single, like carvings or statues built in.
So you can see there, I correctly identified that it's this Gothic, old European style structure. I had the octagon. I eventually got to the point where I said this has things on the roof. I probed the tangibles and got this image of, these little gargoyle, little statues on the roof, little carvings and stuff built into the structure. So using the S4 matrix, you facilitate this aperture opens up wider, and now higher level detailed information comes out, like things on the building, style of architecture. These are the kinds of intuitive information that can be deducted from your other senses, so to speak. You know what I mean? So S4 Matrix is a very powerful tool, and hopefully this gave you some insight into how this information comes through. You got to really work with it. You can't. There's gonna be times in sessions where you just think, "What am I doing? I'm making this stuff up." You know what I mean? I have no idea what I'm talking about. You got to learn to quiet that part of your mind and trust in the structure, trust in your senses, and objectify the things that you perceive during the session. And if you practice, you'll start to see that your sessions will slowly start to match the target better and better. Here's another bit of Daz Smith's work. If you haven't seen, the Farsight Institute has video projects for remote viewing. They have projects that they set up on video. There's one of my favorite projects that they've done is the remote viewing of the 9/11 event, and they had two remote viewers work some targets in relation to the 9/11 events. And you can check out Daz Smith at remoteview.com. He worked the collapse of the North Tower of the World Trade Centers, and here's a image from his stage 3. He's drawn a building that's collapsed, a person's there, and in his stage 4, you can see here, he said, I see a building or structure like this, and he says it's an ornate, a center of something. It's like an important structure, and he says, bring the house down. He keeps getting this idea of bring the house down. It feels like an organized attack, knowing life will be lost. And he says he sees the structure normal, and then he says he sees this broken, change structure. It's this mess. So you can see that in stage 4, you can get some pretty high-level data, and you can actually see this. It's an incredible video project. Daz Smith and another remote viewer, Dick Algar, working targets on the 9/11 events on video. Really good. Check it out. Farsight did that project. So I'm just going to stop at stage 4. Stage 5 can get a little complicated. Stage 5 and 6 are a little more complicated, a little bit harder to explain on video. But up to stage 4 is more than enough to get people interested and to get success doing this. If you can practice stage 1, get good at stage 1, identifying the gestalts, increase your accuracy in stage 2, start doing some sketches in stage 3. By the time you get to stage 4 and you start probing those columns and work a couple sessions up to stage 4, you'll, without a doubt, you will start to see, following the structure, without a doubt, you'll start to see those moments where target data is going to come out in your session. And you'll know what it feels like. Once you do that, you'll know what it feels like to actually be on target, and then what it feels like to be just making stuff up or being completely wrong. Because there is a feeling to this. There is a specific feeling when you're quote unquote on target or really getting intuitive information. It has a very specific feel to it, which you can get familiar with if you practice remote viewing. So yeah, this stages of CRV. This is how they build up on top of each other, and kind of walk you through retrieving this target data, unpacking these ideograms to the point where you can have a more complete description of the target. So I'm just going to recap these 6 stages here before I end this little video here. Hopefully you guys learned something from this. So stage 1, you're working with basic gestalts, across, down, across, structure, hard, very low level data. Stage 2, gray, hard, solid, cold, blue, open space, long, tall, linear, reaching. These are the kind of things you might get in a stage 2. By stage 3, you might draw a little sketch. You might say tall, used, it has a view, people, there's height, there's diagonal parts, it's connected, it's composed, it has support beams or something. By stage 4, you're getting a little more advanced, cold, tall, linear, welded, it's pinnacled, it has visitors, it has a view of the blue sky. From there, you go to stage 5. Stage 5, you take things from stage 4, like the impression of visitors. You take that into stage 5, and you're squeezing that for even more information. Visitors, well, those are people. They're from other places. They're there to visit and tour and take photos and explore. Well, what about tour? Well, it's tourists. They go to the top. They view. It's a romantic view. And by stage 6, you would start doing a physical model with clay or something like this. And by then, probing, touching the clay model, getting more intuitive information by then, or even by stage 4 or stage 5, you might be able to come to the conclusion that it's like the Eiffel Tower. Although that's not the goal of remote viewing. That's the thing to keep in mind here. The goal is not to name the target by any means. The goal is to give an accurate description of the target. And usually that can happen with the viewer being completely clueless. A viewer can do a great session and give a great description of the target, but when you ask the viewer what's the target, they will be like, I don't know, I have no idea. And that's the nature of controlled remote viewing. I've gotten good at using my intellect as well as using my intuition at the same time to kind of make sense of it as I go. But that's not really the point of it. The point of it is to supply and get the cleanest data as possible with as least noise and imagination as possible. And that's what the structure is meant to do. So I hope this helped people kind of understand how this intuitive information bubbles up, how a remote viewer can describe something without being told anything about it at all. These are the stages that I personally have investigated myself and have found success with. And there are other methods, but this is the one that's most publicly easily available. It has a lot of history. There's a lot of research on it. And yeah, I encourage people to really test this yourself. I'm not here to prove anything to anyone. The point is that you can take this and do it yourself. You prove it to yourself. And that's the amazing thing about, natural sciences, real applied sciences. You don't have to take anyone's word. You don't have to take my word for this. You can read the manuals and do the experiments yourself. You can go try these things for yourself. And it's important because this has big implications for, the nature of reality, like I was speaking about earlier, and for human creativity, human intelligence, problem-solving ability. This means a lot, you know what I mean? Subjective, objective dichotomy, space and time. Is time really this linear thing going forward? Because precognition seems to fly in the face of that. There's even remote viewing sessions have been done where the target has been selected after the viewer does the session. So I could work a remote viewing session for the target that will be selected in the future. This has been done as well. So there's a lot of questions, and remote viewing touches on a lot of areas that mainstream science doesn't want to creep into at this point in time. But I think it's very important that we do, because it means more for human individuals and self-empowerment and access to information and truth than anything else. Science is a great tool to find truths, but it turns out that intuition is one of the oldest, most ancient ways of gaining information, and it doesn't require, in the traditional sense, logical thought or scientific processes to gain this information. So hopefully this was enlightening, and hopefully I answered some questions or shed some light on kind of how this works and kind of the complexities involved. It's tedious. It's a very tedious process. Any questions or comments, leave them in the comments section. I'd be glad to, give my opinion or try and answer them. I'm by no means the top expert at this. I was never in the military. I've just been studying this stuff pretty hardcore for the last 6-7 years, and I've been fortunate enough to work with some of the best people in the public space doing remote viewing right now. So I hope you enjoyed this. Check out my website, www.thefeedbackloop.info. Hit subscribe or like, and hit the bell for notifications if you enjoyed this. So thanks for watching. I'm Nyiam. Peace and love, yo.
I invite you to join me, to participate in this inquiry into the miracle of ourselves, to become part of the psychic connection.